Imagine a bank like a big pot of money. The process of making that pot bigger is what is called recapitalization. We'll take a look at the recent announcement by the Central Bank of Nigeria, two banks, and also touch on some important economic moves. Welcome to MarketSquare. My name is Oluwa Pelumi, and as always, I'm glad to have you join me on the show today. The Central Bank of Nigeria recently announced new minimum capital requirements of around 500 billion naira for commercial banks with international authorization and 200 billion naira for commercial banks with national authorization. The Apex Bank also unveiled a new capital base of around 50 billion naira for banks with regional licenses, while non-interest banks with national and regional authorizations are mandated to raise their capital thresholds to around 20 billion naira and 10 billion naira respectively. The CBN Acting Director of Corporate Communications Department, Mrs. Akama, who disclosed this, added that all fresh capital requirements are to be satisfied by March 31st, 2026. This capitalization plan was initially disclosed by the Central Bank of Nigeria's governor, Mr. Cardoso, in his address to the National Bankers' Dinner in November 2023. Mr. Cardoso that year said that this step was necessary to enhance a bank's resilience, solvency, and capacity to continue supporting the growth of the Nigerian economy. Overall, this is a recapitalization attempt to strengthen the financial system, and of which banks have 2 years to meet the new capital requirement. And what we may begin to see is that banks may begin to consider injecting fresh equity capital through private placement, through rights issues, and offers for subscription. We can begin to see mergers and upgrades or downgrades of license authorization to enable them meet the new capital requirement. Meanwhile, the Central Bank of Nigeria has directed all banks to submit an implementation plan, clearly indicating the chosen options for which they will make moves on to meet the new capital requirement and various activities involved with that timeline no later than April 30th, 2024. This is the second day in April 2024, and banks have been asked to submit their implementation plan before the end of this month, the month of April 2024. The Apex Bank also said that it would monitor and ensure the compliance with the new requirement within the specified timelines. Banks with international banking licenses, such as Access Bank, which currently has a minimum capital of around 251.81 billion naira, would have to raise around 248.19 billion naira to meet the new capital requirement of 500 billion naira. Not just Access Bank. We have other banks, other international banks. You have Echo Bank, that currently has a minimum capital of around 353.51 billion naira, needing to raise around 146.49 billion naira to meet the requirement. Not just Access Bank, not just Echo Bank alone. You also have First Bank, presently with around 251.34 billion naira, will need to raise over 200 billion naira to meet the requirement. FCMB, that has at the moment around 125.29 billion naira, will need to raise over 300 billion naira to meet the requirement. GTB, with around 138.19 billion naira, with it at the moment, will need to raise around 361.81 billion naira. Fidelity Bank, with around 115.31 billion naira, will need to raise around 384.70 billion naira. UBA, with a minimum capital of around 115.82 billion naira, will need to raise over 300 billion naira to meet the requirement. Zenith Bank, with around 270.75 billion naira, we need to raise around 229.26 billion naira to meet the requirement. Meanwhile, national banks such as Stanbic IBTC, with around 109.26 billion naira as minimum capital, we need to raise about 90.74 billion naira to meet the minimum capital requirement of around 200 billion naira stated by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Sterling Bank with 57.15 billion naira will need to raise around 142.85 billion naira to meet the new capital requirement by the central bank. Now, in the coming days, it's expected to see fresh equity capital injection, which is simply that banks will be open to new investment of cash in exchange for ownership of the banks. We should also expect mergers. We should also expect acquisitions of banks, just like we saw during the Soludo recapitalization era. That was the year 2004, 2005. In July 2004, Central Bank of Nigeria's governor at the time, which was Mr. Charles Soludo, announced a drastic increase in the minimum capital requirement for banks. And this requirement went from 2 billion naira to 25 billion naira by the end of 2005. That policy forced consolidation in the banking sector. Many smaller banks merged with larger banks or were acquired to meet the new capital requirement. We could also see some banks upgrade their license authorization. And this is, in my own estimation, I see this happening only on a small scale. I do not see so many banks making the upgrade happen for themselves, because I haven't listed some of the banks that you think should even have the requirements stated. You see that there's a lot of gap there. You have EcoBank, you have First Bank, you have Access Bank not meeting the requirement at the moment. So I do not quite see how many banks would want to upgrade their license. I see that there may be one or two, but I don't see so many banks trying to upgrade their requirement. Some banks may upgrade license to higher category, granting them additional permissions and capabilities. But in my analysis, in my own prediction, I see more banks downgrading their license. I see that happening because that's to say that they would then be moved to the lower category, which then limit their operation, but places less pressure on them to want to try to get money or get people in to be able to meet the new capital requirement. I mean, 500 billion naira for international banks that have international authorization, and 200 billion naira for banks that have national authorization. And you could see that so many banks haven't quite met that already. So it's my prediction that we would have more mergers, would have acquisition happen, and would also have more banks downgrade. Trust me, that may most likely happen. Taking the cue from Mr. Soludo's recapitalization era, we can say that banks will grow stronger because the aftermath of the plan of the execution by Mr. Soludo during his time, that was 2004, 2005, we saw that banks grew stronger. Now, this recapitalization may lead to a smaller number but larger and more robust banks in Nigeria. So we could see that more banks will be acquired. More banks may be acquired in the coming days, or some banks may even have to merge in the coming days, which will make them, it will reduce the number of banks we have in Nigeria, or even make our banks stronger and then boost our economy overall. And there will be increased confidence. This will improve public confidence in the banking system and its ability to handle financial risk. We can also expect economic growth. A more stable banking system is seen as a catalyst for economic growth. There is no economy in the world that grows on a weak banking system. Every economy in the world grows on a solid and stable banking system. And I guess that's what the central bank is trying to do now, to ensure that only firmly rooted banks can operate in our space here, which gives us more room for economic growth. We can also expect increased opportunities for borrowing. The eventual beneficiaries would obviously be the people in the private sector, people in the manufacturing sector, people in the informal sector of the economy, which will increase the possibility of more employment opportunities in the country. And with international investment and private equity firms keenly looking to emerging frontiers like Africa for double-digit investment and portfolio gains, the new recapitalization exercise could come at no better time to pump in the much-needed forex into our economy, further strengthening the naira. We have people looking at Nigeria from the outside and seeing how that some moves have been made without looking back. So the president announced that the removal of few subsidies some months back, I mean, the day was being inaugurated, he announced that fuel subsidy is over in Nigeria and all of that. And you could see how investors were happy to plug in their money into our economy. So having this happen, and given that most of our top banks don't quite have the capital requirement yet, we may begin to see some foreigners pumping their money into our economy to have a stake in the economy, have a stake in the banks, and then it increases our economic growth there. But are there challenges to this? Well, I would say that if we're going to take Q, because there's nothing new under the sun, everything that is has always been, right? We could begin to say that there could be job losses. If you take a cue from when there was the recapitalization by Mr. Charles Soludo back in the day, many persons lost their jobs because some banks have to merge, some banks have to close down then. And then if that begins to happen, then it means that more persons will have to lose their jobs. But we're saying that the tendency that more persons will lose their job in the banking sector is high because of the potential of banks merging. It means that some branches would have to close, right? Some branches will have to close down and some persons lose their job in the process, right? But like I said, when I was speaking about the advantage of this, we could also begin to see more frontiers open up in that private individuals can now have the opportunity of borrowing more money because banks will now be willing to borrow more money. And then most likely in the manufacturing sector, there'll be openings for jobs, right? So banking sector may suffer, I guess, but we could see overall effect of this move happen overall. We also would have watered valuations since banks are being forced to create even more shares to meet their new capitalization requirement. This is a disadvantage. Valuations will certainly and in many cases be cut as much as half or perhaps even more. All right. It's my hope that banks don't become too desperate to get investors in. Right. It's my hope that banks don't become too desperate to get investors in. Okay. That's it for that. But let's move on to another part of the show today, which is to talk about the fact that something has happened, which is tax holiday. Tax holiday. 9 tech firms get tax holiday for 159 billion naira investment. If you have never heard of tax holiday, it means that it's a period when investors or owners of companies are given by the federal government not to pay tax. It's like a reward system. This information was contained in the 4th quarter Pioneer Status Incentive Report of the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission. These companies, which have collectively invested over 100 billion naira, are beneficiaries of the Pioneer Status under the Industrial Development Income Tax Act. Now, Pioneer Status is an incentive by the federal government of Nigeria that exempts companies from paying income tax for a certain period of time. This tax exemption can be complete or partial, and the incentive is generally regarded as an industrial measure to stimulate economic investment. A total of 107 companies currently enjoy Pioneer Status Incentive. 13 got their Pioneer Status Incentive granted in the 4th quarter in 2023. 5 got their extension applications approved afterwards. IT companies that have Pioneer Status Incentive under approved in principle granted include East Castle Infrastructure Nigeria Limited, which secured the approval for 3 years with a total investment of around 34.86 billion naira, securing approval for 3 years. Okay, and also Oduduwa Infra's Resources Limited, which got approval for 3 years with a total investment of about 96.15 billion naira. Some companies also that have also gotten the extension include the Main Data Nigeria Limited with a total investment of about 13 billion naira for 2 years. Those already enjoying the Pioneer Status Incentive include Global Independent Connect Limited, which has invested 8.28 billion naira in Nigeria and whose approval expires by 2024. You also have U Lesson Education Limited, which has invested a whooping 470.31 million naira in Nigeria's economy, whose approval expires this year as well, year 2024. And Ogul Pale Limited, which has invested around 650 million naira in Nigeria, which approval expires next year, year 2025. Lastly on the show today, I want to ask you this question. How much does a good meal cost? How much does a good meal cost? Well, for me, if you ask me, I would say that, I would say that porridge, right? Porridge, you have porridge, plantain by the side. So porridge by your right hand side, plantain by your left hand side, and you have meat in the middle. Kai, God, that is so huge. The last time I checked, that cost around 1/8, right? 1/8. But in Nigeria, the cost of basic food items that meet the minimum nutrient requirement has almost doubled within a year. And that's from a report we just got. This puts healthy diet beyond the reach of more Nigerians. Nigeria's average healthy diet food cost increased to around 938 naira per day in February 2024 from what it was in January. That's like 858 naira in January 2024. The National Bureau of Statistics disclosed this in its February Cost of a Healthy Diet report in collaboration with the Gain Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. The cost of healthy diet metric accesses and metrics are, so what are the metrics that they use to gauge if a meal is healthy enough? That's as simple as that. You have availability of food, you have food prices, you have nutritional composition of retail food items to identify the most cost-effective combination meeting the requirement for a healthy diet. In that report, the average cost of healthy diet was highest in the Southwest at 1,157 naira per adult per day, right? Compared to around 723 naira per adult per day in the West. Now, as I'm saying these figures, I like for you to compare it to what you just finished eating, right? Development comes amid the rising cost of food items in Nigeria. Meanwhile, the report explained that cost of healthy diet is not directly comparable to the consumer price index, which stood at 31.70% in February 2024. In recent months, the cost of healthy diet has risen faster than general inflation and food inflation. However, the cost of healthy diet and the food consumer price index are not directly comparable. The cost of healthy diet, which includes fewer items and is measured in naira per day, while the food consumer price index is a weighted index right there. And I'm guessing nobody can say this report is false, right? Because some of the things I've just said here are true as to how expensive things are. If you want to get a good meal for yourself, you may need to spend a lot of money to get that. And that was in February. That's the report from February. We hope to see the report in March, and we expect that in April, good things happen for us going forward. Thank you for joining me on the show today. Now, do well to follow us on Facebook, on social media, on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and also do not forget to keep tabs with us from Monday to Fridays on Morning Brief, all right? Morning Brief, Monday to Friday on YouTube and even on Spotify. My name is Oluwapelumi. Thank you for joining me today. See you in the next one.